Hello and welcome. My name is Ellen with Ellen Estelle, and today I'm going to be showing you how to sew Mccalls M8032, the Blythe dress. This dress has a fitted bodice with a full gathered skirt with a ruffle at the hem, ruffles along the hem of the sleeves, as well as the neckline. In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to sew view C with the ruffle along the neckline, hem, and sleeves. For this dress, I chose the black and creamy pink heart georgette fabric from fashionfabrics.com. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do a rolled hem foot or a baby hem, and I'm also going to show you how to add a lining. I chose to add a lining enclosed in the bodice and the skirt since my fabric is kind of see-through. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to fully enclose the lining at the neckline. I'm also just going to sew it together as if it were the fashion fabric when I sew the skirt. So it's a little bit easier, not all of the lining is enclosed. That means that I just sew the lining and the georgette together and I just finish the edge here. When I cut out my pattern, I did adjust it a little bit. I have a short torso, so I removed 1 inch from the waistline. What I did not account for was how long the skirt was. When you look at the pattern, it looks as though the skirt ends just above the knee, even with the ruffle attached. But the skirt was much longer than that. I ended up, after sewing this, cutting off the ruffle and reattaching it after removing 4 inches from the skirt. So my advice is to measure from your waistline to the end of where you want the skirt to be before you cut. For this pattern, all you'll need is a 22-inch invisible zipper and a hook and eye. It has an invisible zipper here in the center back. In this tutorial, you'll learn how to gather ruffles like no one's business. It has gathering along here at the shoulder, gathering along the neckline, gathering at the waist, and gathering along the ruffles. Now you can either use a gathering foot, which is a special attachment that you can add to your sewing machine, or in this tutorial, I'll show you how to gather just using a long stitch. I would recommend getting a rolled hem foot to finish the edges if you're going to be using a lightweight fabric such as chiffon or georgette like I did. I will show you how to use the rolled hem foot. It is a little tricky, so I'm going to save that part for last. Keep watching to learn more.
First, we're going to start out by cutting out the pattern pieces. I had to do a little more work trying to get my skirt cut out. Instead of the normal 2 front and back pieces, you will need to cut the 1 skirt pattern out 3 times. So make sure you have enough fabric to do this. And don't forget to do the same for your lining pieces. I only cut out the bodice front, back, and 3 skirt pieces in the lining fabric. Next, we want to transfer all of our markings and notches and sew in the darts on the bodice front and back pieces. The bodice pieces should look like this. Press the seams out and towards the back. Don't forget to do the same for the lining fabric. Now we want to sew the bodice front and back pieces with the right sides together at the shoulders for the fashion fabric. And do the same with the lining fabric. Finish the raw edges with either a serger or pinking shears and press the seams towards the back. Now if you are sewing view C with the neck ruffle, take your neck ruffle, piece number 3, and with right sides together, fold the piece in half the long way. Pin at the corners and sew the 2 short ends at 5/8 of an inch. Finish the raw edge and or trim to about 3/8 of an inch and clip the folded corner of the fabric. Then flip your piece right side out and press the folded edge. Make sure to line up your notches. Now sew a basting stitch or the longest stitch length possible along the raw edge of your folded ruffle. To get more even gathers, stitch 2 lines of basting stitches at about 2/8 and 3/8 of an inch respectively. Then pull on the bottom thread of your stitches to gather the ruffle as shown. Now with right sides together, pin your ruffle to your bodice along the raw edge. Sew in place at 5/8 of an inch but do not finish the raw edge yet. Place the lining with right sides together and pin around the neckline. Sew at 5/8 of an inch and finish the raw edge. Press the seam down. Now, in order to make the neckline lie flat, we are going to do a top stitch around the lining. That means you will only be sewing the lining to the seam allowance at about 3/8 of an inch. It should look like this. Before we proceed, it is important to make sure the neckline is lying flat. In order to allow the fabric to curve, you may need to cut a couple of notches into the seam allowance. We're going to sew the side seams next. With right sides facing, pin the fashion fabric together, and then pin your lining over top of the fashion fabric, sandwiching it together on either side. Sew both sides at 5/8 of an inch and finish the raw edges. You will be able to see the seam allowance on the inside of the dress. I chose to sew my lining this way instead of enclosing it because georgette is notoriously lightweight and slippery. Since I used a similar weight for my lining, I was afraid that the two fabrics would rub together and get staticky. So I chose to treat the lining like it was part of the fashion fabric. Now your bodice should look like this. Let's move on to the skirt. We're going to sew the skirt side seams together the same way we did the bodice side seams. It may be easier for you to sew together the fashion fabric first. So with right sides together, pin the fashion fabric together at the side seams. Remember that there are 3 pieces for the skirt. Sew 2 of the side seams together, and on the third one, you will start sewing below the large circle to the hem like this. Then sandwich together your lining fabric to the fashion fabric seams. Sew at 5/8 of an inch and finish the raw edges. It should look like this. I did an edge stitch to the raw edges of the seam that is sewn below the circle like this. Press all of your seams open and or flat. Then we are going to do a double basting stitch along the waist seam of the skirt. That is the top edge of your pattern piece. Pull on the bottom thread to gather the waist seam like this. Then with the fashion fabric together, pin your bodice to your skirt. Make sure the gathers are even along the waist seam. Sew at 5/8 of an inch and finish the raw edge. You will be able to see the seam allowance on the inside of the dress. Now if you're making views B or C, it is time to sew the skirt ruffles. Take piece number 8 and with right sides together, connect the 3 pieces at the shortest ends and sew at 5/8 of an inch. Finish the raw edges and press flat. It should look like this. To make your gathers more evenly distributed, I folded the ruffle pieces in half and cut a small slit in the top. That way I can tell where the center of the piece is, and I can more easily figure out which way is the top. Then fold the 3 skirt pieces in half and cut a notch at the bottom edge of the skirt. Then just as the same as you did for the skirt, you will do 1 or 2 basting stitches at the top edge of the ruffle. This skirt ruffle is only gathered slightly. If you would like more volume, I would suggest cutting out a 4th skirt ruffle piece. Now with right sides together, pin your skirt ruffle to the bottom edge of the skirt, including the lining. Make sure to do this on a flat surface to make sure your lining and fashion fabric are flat and even. If not, your fashion fabric could get bunched up or twisted. Match up the notches, sew at 5/8 of an inch, finish the raw edge, and press the seam flat and down. Last but not least, it's time for the sleeves. Take pieces 4 and 6 if you're making views B or C, and sew a row of basting stitches between the far right and left dots at the top. And sew 2 rows of basting stitches at the top edge of the sleeve ruffle. Pull the bottom threads to gather the ruffle. Attach the sleeve ruffles with right sides together and sew at 5/8 of an inch. Finish the raw edges and press the seam up. Your sleeve should now look like this. Fold the sleeves in half and sew the side seam together at 5/8 of an inch. Finish the raw edge and press the seams towards the back. Make sure to match up your seams. Then pull in the bottom thread of the basting stitch at the top edge of your sleeve. With right sides together, pin the sleeve into the armhole, matching up the notches and seams. Sew at 5/8 of an inch, including the lining and fashion fabric. Finish the raw edges and press. The top of the sleeves will have gathers. Now the finishing touches are to add in the invisible zipper in the center back seam, as well as your hook and eye at the top of the zipper. And finally, we need to hem the sleeves and skirt. So I use a baby hem foot for my machine. This foot has a little roll in the middle of it, which is where your fabric will be fed through. Before you sew, trim off a corner of the seams at an angle. This will help you feed the fabric through the presser foot better. The trickiest part is getting started. It can help to sew a few stitches at the raw edge and leave the threads hanging. That way you can grab onto the edge of the fabric better. What I focus on is pulling the fabric up and into the roll to make sure that there is plenty of fabric for the presser foot to roll under. If not, the fabric may not roll under enough and the raw edge will be visible. Then you will have to unpick and try again. In the case of the fabric rolling under too much, the fabric will roll, but then the raw edge may come peeking out the top. In that case, I just trim the raw edge off. This is not an easy practice. I would highly recommend practicing on a scrap piece of fabric first. But once you get the hang of it, you're done. Mccalls M8032, the Blythe dress, is such a cute spring dress. It's perfect for that lightweight fabric in your stash. Be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time.